Yeah, I don't think this car is really going to cut it anymore. I think we're going to need an upgrade. Oh yeah, I think this will work just fine. Oh yeah, that worked out way better. And for this, you're going to need some coins. Let's figure out how to do that. Ahaha, take 30, let's go. I'm in pain. Either way, welcome back, everybody. Today we're talking about the lovely little game of Crossout and how to absolutely maximize your grind for coins, because if this game is anything, it is needy for coins to get a lot of these nice little pretty toys. So let's go ahead and figure that out. First things first, we're going to start off with the basics. Craft something all the time. Crafting is some of those easy, fundamental things you're going to do in this game. It's right in the name, craft, ride, and destroy. And so there's a lot of things to craft here. There's special tier parts, rare tier parts, common tier parts, epic, legendaries, relics, whole lot of things here. But if you're just starting off here, honestly, you really can't go wrong with just crafting a lot of special and rare tier parts here. So with the nomads right now, we got defenders, vectors, falcons, wyverns, lots of things. And the thing is, though, to keep in mind is that there are some items that are profitable to craft and there are some items that are not profitable to craft. And what I mean by they're not profitable to craft is that if you take up all the value of all of its constituent parts and then just sold it, it might be worth more than the actual final realized part itself, especially when you factor into things like the 10% market tax. So in doing that, you really want to keep in mind what is the actual final value of this item. So for example, the Wyvern Cavern here is selling for roughly around 30-ish coins on the high end and 25.51 on the low end. And when it comes to that, realistically, you're going to need to account for 10% in taxes again, and then you're going to want to go through all of its constituent parts. Think of the scrap, think of the copper, think of this nice huntsman cabin, think of this ruby radar. Once you factor all those into place, you might get its final value, and you can go based off that. And with many parts here, this can take a very long time in order to actually do. So what I really recommend is that if you have the ability to, create just a little bit of like a template spreadsheet like this, where you're actually going through all the individual parts, listing up their values and going through that way, and then just kind of copying pasting this for all the individual parts. That's one way you can go about just kind of calculating what is the actual value of these things. Secondarily, you can use a lovely tool called Crossout database, at least on the PC. I don't think this really works on the markets for console, sadly enough. But if you come over here to the crafting section, you see we have a lot of things here showing up. And if you sort by crafting margin, you can see that there is just oodles and oodles and oodles of parts here that make a huge amount of crafting margin. This thing alone has a crafting margin of close to 1,325 coins. That is huge. But you can see a lot of these parts may not necessarily be able to be crafted because of seasons, or maybe you need work pieces, some other fancy things like that. And also, these things are rather just kind of expensive. So I would sort here by the rarity for common, special, and rare. I don't know why I was blanking out of that for a second. You can see there's actually a lot of parts here with a decent amount of crafting margin. Realistically, these things only cost like 100 or 200 coins to make, and you get 10, 20, 30 coins per. That's awesome. Even if you only stick to the rare parts here, these still have a decent amount of crafting margin of 5 or so coins. So these are honestly really great for making a whole bunch of money. Now, of course, if you're going for the rare tier parts here, these are also kind of nice because you really only need 5 minutes to craft them, and you really only need copper and scrap. And this will take you legitimately 5 minutes, slap it out of the marketplace, and you'll probably get a sale within an hour. It's really easy. And for the most part, I would try to stay away from the legendaries and epic tier parts unless you have a lot of money and you're ready to start actually going and crafting these things, because they can be a bit iffy in whether or not they're actually profitable, and sometimes it can take a long time to sell, especially if you're dealing with any parts that have very low throughput. So legendary parts, these things can take, sometimes over a day to sell, especially if you're not doing competitive bidding or you're changing your price pretty consistently. Secondarily, there's also a lot of things you can do in terms of just building things. I guess kind of a weird thing to say, but these are the things that you can put in your garage. And honestly, I wouldn't mess around with these things because they kind of suffer with the fact that not a whole lot of people are buying and selling these things. So don't worry about it. They're not really worth it. Just keep these things off to the side and don't mess with it. There's also these lovely thing called work pieces. These are kind of a new thing they've been introduced with seasons, and these allow you to craft parts even when the season is not active, and these things can be given out at any point in time, either with new seasons or if you just had it stored in your inventory. And these are kind of weird because they all have different crafting recipes that change from one to the other So for example here, I have 2 trigger recipes and they both have very different crafting recipes. So really take a good look at these things and individually calculate them out before trying to parse out whether or not it's worth it to craft. Honestly, I wish they had an integrated tool that actually calculated up the cost to craft these things, because This takes forever to do by hand. But that's just kind of one of the pain points with crafting, but that's why there's also a lot of opportunity to craft as well and make a decent amount of profit if you put in the time. But once you craft your item, you're going to need to go ahead and sell it on the marketplace here, and there's kind of some funky things that you can do on the market that can either dramatically increase or decrease your profit. So first things first, when it comes to actually selling individual parts here, make sure you're not doing anything quick buy or quick sell, because the thing is, if you do quick buy, that means you buy a part at its highest price at that time. Secondarily, if you do quick sell, you're selling the part at its absolute cheapest value at that time. No. Go into the actual trade panel here, and when you actually have, say, this chain wheel to sell, go ahead and click the sell button here and decrease it by only 0.01 coins. You can decrease it by further by like a whole coin or multiple coins, but generally that doesn't matter, because when someone's doing a quick buy, it doesn't search for like a weird specific value. It just searches for the cheapest. And to be the cheapest, you only have to be the cheapest by 0.01. There is very little benefit to actually decreasing your price further than that. Inverse as well, when you're trying to buy things, make sure you're not buying things at the absolute maximum price here, because it will default to the most expensive option here. But no, if you put a price down here at 0.041, this will actually mean that the next time someone quickly sells an item, you'll be the first person to get it, because you are technically the one offering the highest, lowest price in a kind of weird way like that. So make sure, don't quick buy or don't quick sell. And a secondary thing too is that when you're actually selling these items, you may notice that there is actually kind of a dramatic change in prices here. So for example, here we've gone from 18.81, and in less than 10 trades, we're down to 17.109. And that's because sometimes people drop their price by 0.7, 0.6, a whole coin at a time. When people do that, go ahead and let them do that thing and bid themselves into the ground. With high volume items like blue and special tier parts, these things go pretty frequently, so you really don't have to actually mess around with the price changes like that. Just let them be that. Keep your prices high. If you see the price here is like this 18 coins, maybe I would instead actually just list this as 18.8, just straight up 18.8. Ah, I am messing up here. There we go. Oh wow, you can see that we actually have a little bit of a situation here as well, and this is price corridors. So if you don't know, price corridors are this little magical thing where it kind of restricts the top price and the lowest price based off the most recent sales. And you can see that even though these price drops have kind of happened quite dramatically, I cannot actually list this car at 0.8. It actually defaulted to only that maximum value. And sometimes it can happen with price corridors, and this kind of messes with my previous recommendation, because say you're trying to avoid these price jumps or price spikes, you really can't, because the price corridor has shifted so much. So sometimes just keep aware of that and adjust accordingly. In the worst case, if the price jumps are so dramatic, maybe just wait until the prices stabilize like in a day or two. Another common pitfall that a lot of people seem to get in here is that they see a lot of items they have in their inventory that may be fused, or they can't sell it because of XYZ reason, and they're tempted to salvage these items. But the thing is that unless you really need certain salvage parts, it's not really worth it to salvage, because for things like this array wheel, I only get a stability module, which I can't even sell. And for an item that I crafted, the salvage is actually just like generic scrap that I get that's way less than the actual investment, because each wheel here actually costs around 300 scrap and I only get 150 back. So that means I'm throwing a lot of scrap metal away doing this. So don't scrap or any salvage your items, because I guarantee you at some point you're probably going to use it and you're really going to wish that you hadn't actually salvaged it. In that same vein, make sure you really don't use fusions unless you absolutely need to. And if you don't know what fusions are, you essentially take one part and you sacrifice two others to make that one part way better. Usually it's the same part. So for example, if I want to upgrade my Wyvern Cavern, I need two sacrificial Wyvern Caverns that are consumed and then upgrade one Wyvern Cavern. And in this case, they upgraded in 3 categories, and there's 3 little stats per category that can get upgraded. But you can see these things are like 10% durability, 10% resistance damage. These may seem like a lot, but these only affect that cabin. So this is actually a very small upgrade in the grand scheme of things. When you're one car, it's not just the cabin, it's your hardware, your weapons, your armor parts, your frames, your movement parts. So realistically, fusion is very minor benefit to your car, and is really only necessary if you're doing a lot of grinding, or you're in very competitive clan wars. So don't really salvage and upgrade your items unless you really need to. Next thing you also notice is that a lot of these parts may not be able to be sold. For example, these medium wheels here, despite me crafting them, cannot be bought and sold on the marketplace. And that's because they have a CK on them. You can tell it has a CK just based off the funny little pattern in the background. And so realistically, if you want to get rid of these CKs, all you have to do here is just click remove CK and it takes it off. And congratulations, now you have a traditional normal wheel again. Another thing that you see on the marketplace here is that you see this profit and ROI tab have here, these are referring to flipping. And the thing is, flipping is something that you can do if you want to make a lot of money really quickly. But the thing is that these are risky. For one, you have to get lucky and actually get these items at a low sale price and then be able to flip it at a higher sale price. But that may not happen because a lot of these items have very low amount of people actually buying and trading these things. So you actually may end up with an item that no one wants anymore. And then secondarily, these things also may cost a whole lot of money. So for example here, this Typhoon requires 22,000 coins. That is a lot of money. That's the value of someone's entire inventory in some cases. And on top of that, you might be stuck with an item for many months trying to sell it. So realistically, don't do it. And if you get into a price or a bidding war with somebody, then congratulations, you could just potentially sink the value of the item so much that it's no longer worth it. So don't do it unless you really want something, or you really have a lot of extra money to play around with. But if you're watching this video, you probably don't need me to tell you that. Another thing is too, you also may be tempted to open up a lot of the crates that you get throughout this game through a variety of means. But for the most part, if your crate can't be sold, I'd recommend just going ahead and selling your crate, because for the most part, the crate's value is going to be worth more than the averages of all the items within it anyway. So just go ahead and sell the crate. You're going to be way better off in 99.999% of circumstances. If the crate can't be sold, then you might as well just go ahead and open it. I have a lot of crates here that I'm just collecting for the giggles of it, but if they don't have a sale value, then just go ahead and open it and hoopla, there you go. Now let's talk about these lovely fuel barrels that you'll be seeing on a lot of PvP-based vehicles. So when it comes to missions, you can actually earn fuel just by having these fuel barrels on your car. Now be warned, you have to win the match, these fuel barrels have to survive, and you have to survive, of course. If all those conditions are met, then you get fuel if you have these fuel barrels on your car. And both of them actually stack. So you have the classic common rare fuel barrel and the rare fuel tank. One gives 5, one gives 10 liters. And the thing is, these both stack. So per win, you can get a maximum of 15 liters of fuel per win. And that's honestly kind of a lot, because 100 fuel can be sold for around 8 coins right now. And so if you just win, like, 8 matches, you get yourself just a whole bunch of free fuel. Win yourself 6 matches, you still get like 8 coins worth of profit. And it's on top of everything else you earn too. So it's a free thing to have on there. But the thing is, these things are explosive and rather brittle, and they add a little bit of power score, not too much though. So the best way to actually protect these things is to hide them underneath your car. That's what really everyone does, because easy enough to kind of widen your frame base here to still accommodate for things like treads. But if they're underneath your car like this, realistically, you have enough clearance that you're really not going to collide with anything. Plus, when you're driving around, unless you're like rolling over cryo damage or fire damage, you're not really going to be able to pop these things. Now, if you get flipped, it's going to pop. But these things are a bit more sensitive too, because explosions are a thing in this game. And if your frames are not really protected, you can kind of have an issue where the explosion kind of peeks underneath your car and explodes your fuel barrels. That's not terribly common, but it does happen, especially on thinner vehicles. So you can kind of get around this a little bit by adding in armor pieces that kind of protect it a bit more, but that's kind of accessory and not terribly necessary. Plus, if you do that, you might run into an issue where the actual fuel barrel itself will catch on the ground, and that's not really that good. And if you want to know where your fuel is, you can actually come over here to your inventory. You can go ahead and quickly trade it from this tab itself. Super easy. All right, so then let's talk about Leviathan. Leviathans are a bit funky, because the thing is that these things, you basically just make one giant car with a lot of energy, and then you send it out to battle for you, and it comes back and earns copper. Even if it loses, it actually earns copper for you. So even if you don't have that great of a Leviathan, it's still worth it to send it out, because it's just basically giving you free resources. Though it only lasts for 24 hours out in the battlefield, you will have to redeploy it basically every single day. But if you're doing your daily missions, that's just a nice thing to do on top of that, and it's just free copper. Now, the thing to consider about this is that it's a part of a PVE raid, and people with 5,000 plus power score can go inside and actually battle a bunch of Leviathans. And there's 3 waves, so they go from like a very small Leviathan up to a very big Leviathan. So the thing is, even if you don't have the absolute best banging Leviathan with many relic parts there, you can actually still participate even as a small Leviathan. And honestly, you might find yourself actually participating in a lot more battles if you have a very low power score Leviathan, because that can either be used and from tier 1 to tier 3 with very small, weak people that go into PvE, or even if, facing very high power score people, maybe instead of being the 3rd wave, you're actually just the 1st wave. You're the warm-up act. So honestly, build a Leviathan at any power score, send it out there, and you'll probably do just fine. Now, that being said, though, you're going to make sure your Leviathan's at least somewhat useful. You want to have at least like 5-ish, 10,000 power score to get out there to at least pass the minimums. But anything is better than nothing. Next, let's talk about missions. Missions are a bit funny because these are the PvP missions you're going to be doing classically all the time. And for right now, there's actually two varieties, the Next Step and the Classic variety. With the Classic variety, there are a variety of resources that you can get. You can either get scrap, wires, or batteries. There's also these patrol missions. Don't worry about them, though. They kind of suck. They don't give you a lot of resources, but they're great for grinding out seasonal challenges. But back to these Classic missions, which one of these is actually worth it the most to grind out? And for the most part, scrap maintains a very high value, very easy to sell, and so if you can, just grind out scrap like crazy. But the thing is to consider is that these wires and batteries missions have challenges associated with them. So if you come over here to the challenges section on the regular side of thing, there are weekly challenges that incentivize you to go do these get the wire missions or get the battery missions. And if you do those, you get a pretty substantial amount of engineer's badges, which then you can use to even get more resources. So for the most part, you're going to want to go ahead and grind out to get the batteries and get the wires, at least to fulfill your weekly challenges, and then go back to grinding out scrap. Another thing to consider, though, is that scrap has a weekly amount cap, so you can only get a roughly around 4,500 scrap per week, and that is locked for 7 days. Same thing with wires, except the cap is now at 2,800, but to be fair, wires are generally more expensive anyway, so the less rewards and less cap actually kind of balances out. Batteries is kind of following that same trend. You get a very small amount of rewards, and it only has a cap of 1,400, but batteries themselves tend to be a lot more expensive per unit. Additionally, when we're talking about the Next Step missions, these are a slightly different form of it. It's still team deathmatch, but you have to collect the tags that drop from the enemies, kind of similar to like Call of Duty's dog tag type of mode. And also, it tend to last quite a bit longer because you have to get to 15 kills as opposed to just everyone dying. So with that, it takes a little bit longer, but the rewards are substantially higher. They're usually around 2 times what you get from classic missions, but these Next Step missions take approximately twice as long. So realistically, grinding is about the same for these. But the quirky thing is that some of these missions actually may have seasonal challenges tied to them. So for example here, with this you have the Next Step season and the Jackpot season, and both of these require you to do the Next Step mission varieties, which are these are the ones that have the walkers and the helicopters with them, and they have slightly changed power score requirements as well. So while these may take a little bit longer and may be harder to maybe quote-unquote win if you're just starting out here, they're still very much worth it because these seasonal rewards that you get for doing these challenges might actually end up being worth it. So for example, in the big season here, you get a lot of armor parts here, which can be valuable for someone just starting off and you don't have a lot to begin with. Plus, at the very high tier, you see that you get things like coins and humanitarian aid containers that just give you free resources. On the smaller season side of things, they actually give you a lot more free things for a free player that can just be straight up converted into coins. So things like coupons, badges, containers that give you resources, epic coupons. And then at the absolute very highest end, you get a freaking crate here that's worth nearly 480-ish coins. That's the cost of an epic tier weapon or even 2 of them. So honestly, grinding out these seasonal challenges, fantastic when you're doing these type of modes. Now let's talk about PVE missions, these lovely raids. There's quite a few raid options here that you have, but there's also a thing you have to consider as well. You get free 200 fuel a day. This doesn't pop into your inventory or anything. It actually just pops into your fuel tank straight up. So if you have a little bit of fuel left over, it just gets refilled up to 200 after 24 hours. But what type of PVE raid should you do? And for the most part, I recommend just sticking with the classic electronics and sticking with the classic plastic medium raids because these are generally going to have the highest bang for your buck. And if you want to actually go ahead and calculate it out on this spreadsheet side of things, I actually have it so it actually can calculate out the amount of resources you get per mission. So take a look at that later on. But for the most part, you should also really consider what mission type there is. For the most part, all the missions offer relatively the same amount of rewards per amount of time you spend on it. Some missions might give you a little bit higher, like Frontier Defense will give you more rewards per mission. Downside, though, is that it takes about, 10 minutes to do as compared to like 7 or 8 of the other missions. You should also consider what faction is in them as well, because the faction actually changes on its rotational basis here. So sometimes it might be Lunatics, sometimes it might be Firestarters, sometimes it might be Steppenwolves, sometimes it might be Scavengers, etc., etc., etc. So generally, the Firestars and Lunatics are actually the easiest faction to play against because they have very, very weak vehicles that can easily be popped with a classic build. On the inverse side of things, Steppenwolves and Scavengers have very big, beefy builds with a lot of explosive bits in it, but they can be very, very, very durable. Plus, they also have cannons, so they can really shoot you at a very long distance. Another thing to also avoid is that generally Steel Cradle can kind of be a hard mission type for a lot of new players, and I've had the least amount of success on PvE Steel Cradle missions, so try to avoid those if you're concerned about losing. But for the most part, I tend to maintain a win rate of like 99.99% in raids, so losing is very uncommon. Alternatively, you could do invasions if you have a really good build that's good against Leviathans, because this is Leviathan-only battles. The downside is, though, is that Missions like this I tend to fail quite frequently, so unless you have a really good team that knows how to deal with Leviathans, try not to do invasions, but it can be a nice little quick reward here, and it tends to have the absolute best bang for your buck when it comes to grinding out copper. Kind of a weird thing to kind of recommend, but is actually kind of useful, is just follow their social media pages, because sometimes they just straight up give away packs for people that are quick on their social media pages, as well as just join their Discord too, because their Discord can also have things like contests, and if you participate in them, you can get things like just battle passes and subscription time, as well as just additional packs as well. So stick around on these social medias, and you might get lucky and get a free resource out of it. Why not? It's free. And then I'd be doing oh so poor of a job if I did not talk about the subscription service that Crossout offers. While it is kind of cringy to kind of promote this thing, the thing is it does actually help out your grind a heck of a lot, obviously. So with a prescription time here, you actually get kind of a few things. For one, it increases the amount of rewards you get from missions just straight up by 50%. So if you get like 20 electronics, now you get 40. If you got 50 scrap, now you get 100 scrap. Plus with that, it doubles the amount of rewards. So we talked about how scrap was 4,500 weekly. Now it's 9,000 with this. So you can get a lot more resources if you do this. Secondarily, it also unlocks a daily challenge for 40 coins. And this is usually like do like a mission or two and you get 40 coins. So if you do that, that's kind of nice. Plus, if you're also a newer player, it doubles the reputation gain you get by 50%, as well as also increases the amount of intelligence, which is the resource they use for the co-drivers. So it helps out with just grinding. That being said, though, it's rather expensive as is. So usually people wait until they have a winter sale, and the winter sale is usually half off for the year-long subscription, and that is honestly the best bang for your buck if you're going to do it. Wait for that sale. If not, you can always just buy this thing. I think they have rolling sales throughout the season for like the 30 or 90-day times, but these are way less of a value. So really hope that kind of helped out actually getting out your initial coin grind here. If you want to scale the type of guides here, consider subscribing to this channel. Maybe comment down below as to what I should do next in terms of updating guides. But other than that, if you enjoyed what you've seen here, also consider following the social medias as well. We occasionally post when we go live out there, as well as just join and interact with the community. Beyond that, though, there is also an option to become a member on this channel for selling it at only 99 cents. Rather a bargain bin basement deal, if I tell you that myself. And honestly, way cheaper than actually subscribing to this game. So why don't you try that down below? But on that, I want to thank you all again, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye. Want to thank Aversalian for this WM shield thing. It looks absolutely beastly. Downside is, though, one back shot and this thing is just